Introducing health and wellness advocate, veteran international real estate investment expert, author and speaker, Adiel Gorel.
Health tips, fitness tips, nutrition and well-being, world-class experts, all right here on my podcast, The Adiel Gorel Show. Hi, everyone. We are fortunate to have with us today Dr. Kat Toups. This is going to be an interview that I'm excited about, and I think it can make a difference in all of our lives. Kat Toups is an MD. She's a functional medicine psychiatrist at the Bay Area Wellness in Walnut Creek, and is the organizer and the administrator for the Bay Area Functional Medicine Group since 2012. Dr. Toups is a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. That's the highest honor bestowed by the APA. She's board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and was previously boarded in geriatric psychiatry. Dr. Toups is a former assistant professor of psychiatry at UC Davis, where she was the inpatient residency training director and later the owner and medical director of the Bay Area Research Institute, a clinical trials research center in Lafayette, California. After serving as the principal investigator on over 100 clinical trials for 12 years, including 20 failed trials for Alzheimer's drugs, she realized that the elusive cure for brain and psychiatric illness was not going to be found in a pill. She embarked on an intensive course of study, initially sparked by a quest to heal her own serious disease, to learn functional and nutritional medicine, and completed her training for the Institute for Functional Medicine certification in 2013. Dr. Toups practices functional medicine psychiatry, which seeks to recover the underlying causes of inflammation, such as diet, nutrition, lifestyle, genetics, and things like MTHF, methylation, etc. She focuses on the detection and correction of these problems, and they can result in the resolution of the psychiatric symptoms, rather than just providing a Band-Aid, only prescribing the psychiatric medications without really going to the source. Dr. Toups appeared on my PBS special, Life 201, and has written a useful and comprehensive chapter in the book we created from the show, Life 201. Dr. Toups also works with people having health challenges that are not experiencing psychiatric problems. So Dr. Toups can be a resource for all of us. May I call you Kat?
Of course, yes.
Well, Kat, it's really a pleasure to have you here with us. And I was wondering if you could sort of take us through the journey that you had, getting from when you started as a regular MD to where you are now.
Yeah, well, I'll encapsulate that since it's a long journey. But I was working, running a clinical trials research center. And I did over 100 clinical trials, all different kinds of psychiatric medications and fibromyalgia, sleep studies, sexual dysfunction, different medications for different types of illnesses. And, as you mentioned, every study I did, I would get so excited, like, oh, here's a new mechanism of action. This different mechanism of action is going to help depression better or help dementia better. And the pills, the medications, they can help people, right? They're Band-Aids, and they can help people and they can relieve symptoms. But, really, the goal for me, and I think for most people that go into medicine, is we want to get people well, right? I don't want to just manage your illness forever. I want to get you well. So so it was a journey of starting to, feel, I guess, increasingly frustrated that process. But as you mentioned, my own health challenges are what brought me to the functional medicine table. And I think that's how so many of us come to functional medicine, our own health problems or our family's health problems. So I was doing a lot of long-term dementia trials, and I started to become as cognitively impaired as my patients. I was about 50 years old, and I would test my patients on their memory, and I would give them 3 words to remember. And I would say, okay, remember these words. I'll come back to them in a few minutes. And a few minutes later, I couldn't remember the words. And I had used those words for 20 years, 2 different sets of words, and I'd have to write them down so I could remember. But so I was struggling myself. And, what was going on was I had developed multiple chemical sensitivity, which I didn't know that term at the time, but I had become allergic to everything. I was covered with rashes, covered with hives. I was up all night long putting on steroids and lotions, and I'd go through a big bottle of, lotions in a week because I was so itchy. I had terrible fatigue. I couldn't get out of a chair for a year. And, if I could get out of a chair and walk into a store, the smells would give me more rashes and hives and fatigue. But the worst of all that was all that inflammation that was happening in my body was eating up my brain. And so it wasn't just being able to remember the 3 words, things got quite a bit worse. And I really came to recognize that I was as cognitively impaired as the patients I was testing in my dementia trials. And so I noticed that I couldn't drive well anymore. I could no longer back up my car or parallel park my car. Like parallel park, I would go and try to do it and then start over again and start over again. And I could do that before, I can do it now. I couldn't do it. My brain couldn't sequence those things. And then I couldn't do things on a computer anymore. I would ask my husband over and over, please come show me how to do this. I can't remember how to do this. And he'd get angry, or not really angry, but annoyed with me, because he'd say, Kat, I just told you that yesterday.
So most people would consider it, and that was actually going to be my next question, a death sentence. Like it can only get worse. What did you do? What did you do?
Right. Well, it did get worse. I lost the ability to decode what was being said. I kept thinking I was having a hearing problem, and I would go and ask for hearing aids. And one day the ENT said to me, Kat, this problem isn't in your ear, it's in your brain. And so I had developed the auditory processing, which oftentimes children with learning disabilities are born with. And I have so much empathy for them because you just get snatches of each word. So your ear is hearing it, but your brain can't decode it. So, it's who thinks of dementia when you're 50 years old. But the reality is these days we're seeing so much more cognitive decline in dementia earlier and earlier, right? Because of the toxicities of the world and all of the things that are happening. So what did I do about it? I had to unravel things through the layers. And this is, what functional medicine brought for me. I had to close down my research center and move all my trials somewhere else. I thought I was going to take a month off of work, which I'd never done in my life, which was probably one of the problems leading to, illness. And then I would be fine. But it was a 3-year journey for me to work through the layers of all the things that were wrong, that were eating up my brain. To get things back. So, I did discover functional medicine, and the next module at the Institute for Functional Medicine was autoimmune and allergy. So I said, oh my goodness, I need that. I basically, as I learned each journey, each module that I worked through in functional medicine, I had all those problems. And so the thing with any kind of chronic illness, cognitive decline, it's not just one thing, right? It's a multitude of things, and they all layer upon each other. And then finally, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So, in my own case, and like with every, case, you start with the gut, right? What is the health of your gut? The gut is the root of our immune system. And clearly my immune system was a mess. I was reacting to everything. My immunoglobulins were low. My natural killer cells were low. And so, start with gut healing. So, work through the gut healing. And then it's, oh, my cholesterol's too low. I was trained, like many of us of a certain age, like eat a low fat diet, right? Like that's what's healthy for us. And so my cholesterol was about 135, which is really low. And I thought that was good. I was told, oh, great, you're not going to get heart disease. Well, okay, I didn't get heart disease, but I got dementia, and so one of the things that I learned on my journey is the importance of fat in our diet, because our brain is fat. When you think of that spongy white material in our brain, that's fat. And then around our nerves, the myelin sheaths in our nerves are made of fat. And so we need that fat to conduct the impulses down our nerves. And so when we have, too little fat, we can't support our brain. And then the cholesterol, which turns out to be a good fat and not a bad fat. And there are obviously some lipid particles that are more destructive and are not good particles, but the cholesterol is a precursor to all your sex hormones, to your thyroid hormones. So if you don't have enough of that, in order, not only just not supporting all of the neurons and the phospholipid layers of each cell in your brain, you're not going to be able to make your hormones properly. So in my own case, one more layer, menopause. I was 50 years old. I was, getting near the end of my menopause transition. I didn't, my hormone levels were low. And, one of the things that we know now and that we work with in supporting people's brains is let's get all their hormones back in balance. We don't need to make those hormones that like a 20-year-old, right? But you need some hormones. And of course, what I learned was that there's receptors in our brain for all of these sex hormones. So we think, okay, therefore our sexual organs and our reproductive function. Okay, they are, but they're also for our brain and our cognitive function. And so we have receptors in our brain. Men and women have estrogen receptors. Men and women have testosterone receptors, progesterone, pregnenolone, and DHEA. So all of those hormones they're neurotrophic. They're providing life and supporting the cognitive function. And something that I only learned, I think about a year ago, was that those hormones are so important that our brain actually makes some directly. So we think that, the estrogen's coming from the ovaries and testosterone from the testicles. No, our brain is making those hormones. But what happens? So even after we go through menopause, or andropause is what it's called in men, as they lose their testosterone with aging, our brain should still be making some hormones. But if there's anything disrupting our brain function and causing inflammation in our brain, it's going to disrupt that production. So getting the hormones right for me were another factor. Then you look at the toxins, right? I don't detoxify well. I think you mentioned MTHFR. There's many genes that contribute to our ability to detoxify, and the genes don't determine everything, but some people are dealt more problems detoxifying than others, and I was one of them. And I don't detoxify things well. So when I looked at a panel with my chemical toxin levels, I was very high on a lot of toxins. And when I looked at my metals, I was, higher than I should be in lead. One of the things I see quite frequently with my patients with cognitive decline is that they're higher than other people of their age with mercury. And the mercury, I want to say, is not that hard to fix for most people, especially if you don't have a mouthful of mercury fillings, but a lot of it is coming from the fish, right? Unfortunately, our oceans have been polluted. And so if people will actually avoid, if your mercury turns out to be high, and that is something easy to check at Quest, at LabCorp, you just do a whole blood mercury level. It doesn't have to be a fancy test, but it's important to know, because some people come back sky high. But if you stop eating the fish for 4 to 6 months and you work on other methods of detox, like sweating, like sauna, like heavy exercise, we know that when we sweat, it's a natural detoxifier, right? Our bodies are made to heal if we get out of their way. So when you sweat, you literally the toxins with the heavy metals and the chemical toxins can come out through your sweat. And of course, you can take, supplements and nutrients. Broccoli extract is one that I love to help support the liver, and it upregulates all kinds of.
What's the extract? I'm sorry, can you say it again?
A broccoli extract.
Broccoli extract.
So it's sulforaphanes is the more technical name, but it's broccoli extract. And so, of course, you can eat a lot of broccoli, which is great. But when you take supplements, where they've come, I think they say like eating one of these tablets is like, eating, I don't know, 6 or 8 heads of broccoli, right? And but the enzymes that are involved with broccoli are just beautiful natural detoxifiers. So that's one of my favorite things to help people's liver. There's one that I use that they have data that says that it upregulates over 200 phase 2 liver detox enzymes. So, so you have to look at the toxins, right? And all of those things. And we can talk about any of this in more detail. But then let's see, what else was there?
So let me ask you this. Ask you this. So, okay, you discover all of those things. You start detoxifying yourself. You take the broccoli, you take the things, you do the sauna. We'll talk about that. So then clearly you get better, because here you are years later, and you're talking more lucidly than any person, maybe, clearly. So what happened?
It's a process. I'm thinking there were more layers. There's infections, there's viruses. I had high levels of viral titers. When your immune system doesn't work, the viruses that infect us. When we get viruses, and of course we're learning so much about this with COVID right now, but these viruses integrate into our systems, and our immune system puts a lid on them and keeps them in check. But when as we age, we have a natural, decline in immunity. It's not inevitable to totally lose your immunity. It's just that many other systems are breaking down. And of course, anytime, we have other medical problems, high stress, our immune system takes a beating, and viruses can wake up or reactivate, and they can start, replicating again and causing us trouble again. And so what happens then is our immune system comes in and says, "Oh, let's kill these invaders." And, and then to kill the invaders, it's releasing all of these inflammatory cytokines. And when those kind of things are happening in our brain, it just wreaks havoc in our brain, and it's destructive, right? It starts killing neurons if it's going on too long and too vigorously. And we see this now even with young people post-COVID, right? We're seeing the brain fog in the long hauler syndrome. So we know that it's affecting people's brains. We already knew that because of the loss of smell. So many of these viruses love our brain. It's a hospitable environment for viruses. So some of the things we do is we look at the levels of Epstein-Barr virus, and herpes simplex 1 has been strongly correlated with cognitive issues. Herpes 2 is not as strongly as 1. HHV6, cytomegalovirus. So we kind of look at the picture of the general viral load, and then there's many herbs and protocols to help knock down the viral levels while at the same time you're supporting your immune system.
So let me ask you this. Yes, if two people are exactly the same, as they age, statistically the immune system will be not as effective. The viral load that they carry, because a lot of people carry viruses and bacteria and all kinds of stuff in their system, will start having more of it. But if one of those two people decides to call you and you put them on a regime, both of them are healthy. Let's say, I'm just going to pick an age. They're both 60 now.
Okay.
Perfectly healthy, lucid, nice, beautiful, everything. But they know about the stuff that you're talking about. They say, when I'm 75, I don't want to have issues. So you put them on a certain simple regimen. So let's talk. Let's start one at a time. Let's start with food. Let's start with that one.
Good place to start, right? Food has the power to turn on good genes or turn on bad genes. It has the problem to nourish us and heal us, or it has a problem to destroy us, right? So that is definitely where you would start, right? A basic, clean diet. And the the whole, I think one of the factors of the decline of the health of our population was the rise of processed food, right? That came in the 60s. We had Hamburger Helper, and it's the first thing I remember, and it was sold to everybody as this is what you should be feeding your families, right? And then we went on to lean cuisine frozen dinners, and, so the processed food for me is probably, the biggest thing, right? We should be eating real food, not dead, killed food. We need stuff to nourish us. And, then it is the balance. I mean, there's all kinds of diets, and some people do great on a vegan diet with caveats, and some people do well on more of a meat diet. And, we are individuals. We have different genetics. We have different tendencies. So sometimes it takes some experimentation, but, in general, the thinking is to simplify. You want to eat more vegetables than animal protein, and animal protein, if it's from free range animals that are not highly inflamed, can be very, very useful for people. But, and there is now a new diet that's the carnivore diet. And some people swear that they've, cured things for themselves by eating all meat and not eating the vegetables. But in general, we want to eat, a bunch of vegetables and a little, they say the size of the palm of your hand with your animal protein.
Big hands.
Well, it's, again, it's individual, but, and then for my patients, I ask them all to stop gluten. And gluten is unfortunately the most inflammatory thing we eat. Our wheat has been hybridized over the past several decades, and they bred it to have more protein, which seemed like a good goal, but it backfired. So messing with Mother Nature sometimes is not the best thing to do, as people are learning. And so when you eat the wheat, excuse me, it doesn't matter whether you're allergic to it or not. If you're allergic or you have celiac disease, you're going to have a very dramatic reaction. But people may not notice it because they're generally eating it every day, multiple times a day. And it elevates a protein called zonulin that literally will destroy the lining of your gut and make it more permeable. And when your gut is permeable, then when you eat, those food particles are going through those little microscopic holes and getting absorbed into your bloodstream. And of course, any bacteria that's come in with your food, as it certainly does, same thing. So our blood is supposed to be sterile. And when these things are getting into our blood, what happens? It's going to activate that immune response to kill those invaders. Again, any inflammation in the short term is healthy. It's going to solve a problem. You get cut, you need to, have the inflammation to stop the bleeding, to heal the tissue, remodel it. But if it's going on chronically all the time, it becomes destructive. So the gluten grains can be destructive to the gut, which I want to be very healthy and vibrant because that is the root of our immune system. And it's also the grains in general tend to be very high in sugar. So we call it a high glycemic index. The glycemic index is a measure of how much sugar that you have. And the glycemic index of wheat is 20% higher than table sugar. And people say, well, I only eat whole wheat. It's good for me. Okay, well, the glycemic index of whole wheat is higher than white bread is a lower risk for that.
Yeah. So Kat, gluten, you say in general for all people, not just celiac. Okay, so that's one thing. I mean, is sourdough bread legal in this kind of scheme?
I know you like that sourdough bread.
No, it's not me. It's just in general. That seems to be the escape valve. So I want to hear it from you.
Yeah, I couldn't buy into that, and I do love sourdough bread, and I do miss it. But I'm so happy to have my brain back. Here 12 years later, that it's gone forever for me. But it's still made from wheat. It's still going to have, it's fermented. So people might rationalize, okay, there's a fermentation that helps your, gut bacteria, but it's still the same problems with high sugar and, potentially with inflammation in the gut. But people are making some marvelous, even grain-free breads now. I mean, people are definitely figuring that out.
Yeah, of course. There are flours made of pretty much, everything now. Every veggie, So you can, So, okay, no gluten. Before, you said something that I consider very important.
Right.
Fat was the enemy for 50 years.
Right.
Where it shouldn't have been. And
Right.
you told us in a very nice way how fat is absolutely critical for us. I was fortunate. My nutritionist, Crispin, who I may be lucky enough to get on this show, about 35 years ago, I got a blood test and I was delighted because my total cholesterol was 139.
Yeah, like mine. Yeah.
She said it's way too low. It's not
Right.
good. That's when I learned all of that stuff. Luckily, I learned it 35 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very important. Of course, now in the past decade, fat is no longer the villain, but still,
Right.
just the word fat is an unfortunate word because people, oh, you look fat. You know, it's just not a good, connotation. But fats are good. Can you run through a few fats that we should really have in our diets?
Yes. And, Dr. Mark Hyman is fond of saying fat doesn't make you fat. Fat is a fuel source for our body. And so it is a misnomer that it will get stored as fat. And the carbs and the sugar are more likely to get stored as fat.
I think we should not call it fat. We should call it Kevin. Now it doesn't have, the connotation.
Yeah.
I'm fat. I'm eating fat.
Yeah.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So what sources of fat would you say?
Right. Well, there's sources of fats that are unhealthy and that are healthy, right? And there's many fats that are inflammatory, and there's fats that are healthy. So yeah, the healthiest of fats would be like coconut, avocado, free range meats, and fish and wild caught fish, and then nuts and seeds. Those are probably the healthiest.
Okay, let me ask you this. I'm going to drill just a little bit into it.
Okay.
Everybody knows nuts. They have a lot of good things for us. They have good. However, most nuts have a ratio of omega-6 to 3, which is not beneficial. So that says to a lot of people, nuts should be eaten in great moderation, because one of the other things which I'm sure you're going to talk about in a second is omega-3s.
Right.
So how much? And the nuts, and most nuts are very high, in omega-6.
Yeah, well, the nuts, again, maybe back to your hand, like eat a handful, but don't eat a whole bag. So that was kind of the hierarchy, coconut, avocado. Oh, I missed olive oil. Pardon me, olive oil, beautiful, healthy fat. So, coconut, olive oil, avocado, like those are pretty clean fats. However, even there's some distinctions there. For the coconut is more of a saturated fat than olive oil. And some people do beautifully with high saturated fats, and some people, it will elevate their lipids. So, there's not a one size fits all, but in general, those are really good, healthy fats. Now, the omega-3 and omega-6s are just a fascinating study because we need omega-6s, we need omega-9s, we need them all in a balance. And there's ratios that we can look at, and these can be tested through Quest and LabCorp these days to look at your omega-3 and 6 levels and see, do you have the right amounts? Now, we know those omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, and the omega-6s can be pro-inflammatory. And the story of why you want to really spend your money and eat free-range beef is a great one to illustrate the omega-3s and 6s. So when you have a free-range beef cow, they're happily living their life, low stress, out in the fields, eating the grasses and things that they should be eating in their natural diet. They are very high in omega-3 and low in omega-6. So, we went through a phase where all beef is bad, and, no, it's not all bad. But in general, the free range is great for the omega-3s. Now, when you take the feedlot beef, they're fed a high fat diet. They're fed grains. The grains make them fat, just like they make us fat. So the fat doesn't make us fat. The grains make us fat. That's the high sugar. And so they want those cows to get fat because there's more beef to sell, right? But what happens when you're fat is the fat is inflamed. And so when we carry a lot of fat, the fat secretes its own inflammatory cytokines, which is one of the things that makes it hard for people to lose weight when they're, already highly inflamed. And the only way to do that is it's not just cutting calories, but it's shifting the balance of eating foods that aren't inflammatory. So Also the feedlot beef, they're, kept in high stress situations, are all closed in. And when we're under stress, so this is a very important point for many things in our general healing, it elevates our cortisol, our stress hormone. And when cortisol is elevated, it tells our body there's danger and we need to store our calories as fat. So stress alone can make you fat. And so all those are factors with the cows that are kept in the feedlot. And what they found was that those cows are very high in omega-6, the feedlot cows, and low in omega-3. So when you're eating, non-free range beef, it's going to have a much higher inflammation level for people.
So now we go into a more fine distinction, a finer, distinction, I should say.
Yeah.
Some people, I believe you have the right to call your beef free range, and yet the last month or two, you fattened them up with grain.
Yes.
So
yes.
There is the term grass-fed, grass-finished.
Right.
Right.
So definitely best to do that one. Definitely best to do that one, because in the end, they're piling on those grains to make them fat and inflamed.
By the way, do you know that I've been to countries that in the entire country, there is not a single farm with grass-fed beef in the whole country. So we are lucky here in the US, especially where we live, Kat.
Yeah.
There are many farms right within maybe 10 miles of me.
Right.
You can get that. So, but again, to our viewers who are vegetarian, vegan, it's fine. We just covered beef for the people who want to eat some of that. Thanks for joining me today. Click the subscribe button for more video. Got a question or comment? I love questions and comments. Leave yours below. And here's another video you've got to see.